my sister has been missing for almost 5 days now. She's got a 13-year-old daughter, and we are worried sick.
There was more to this than just a missing persons case.
There's no way. She's not leaving her daughter.
That was very concerning to me.
We're certain that some type of foul play has been involved.
CCTV played a massive role in this case. We knew that they were lying because of the CCTV.
All I want to do is find her, and I want to give you a chance to dig yourself out of the hole.
37-year-old Marilee Cox Lafferty prepares for a 900-mile road trip from her home in California to Utah.
I met Marilee when we were teenagers. We went to a counseling group together. She was a misfit, and she was funny, and she was hardworking.
Marilee hopes to rekindle a romance with an old flame.
I knew the person that she was seeing was Rob Willis. She had known him since she was very young, about 16.
Honey, are you ready?
Marilee's 13-year-old daughter, Shayna, is coming with her.
They sure were always together. Very rarely were they separated. She was a really good mom.
Marilee wants to build a better future for herself after a lifetime of challenges.
Over the years, Marilee struggled with a bunch of battles. She was very open about them as well. She struggled with anxiety and depression and addiction.
She was a severe alcoholic. They said that she would have died if she wouldn't have quit drinking.
From that point on, after she went through recovery, I was so proud of Marilee when she had done the work that she needed to do to get sober.
That's a good girl. Come on.
Her service dog, Coco, will be traveling by her side.
She was epileptic. She would black out and have full-on grand mal seizures. They had her on a lot of different medications.
So she got Coco, a dog that could help if something happened to her. Marilee was just trying to figure out how she could both live with this condition and also be the sole provider for her daughter. That was her #1 priority.
This is Christy. Hi, ma'am. My name's Shawnee Weissman, and my sister has been missing for almost 5 days now. The last she was in the Logan, Utah area, and she's got a 13-year-old daughter, and we are worried sick.
The person that reported Marilee missing was her friend, who she referred to as kind of her sister. Her name is Shawnee.
Does she live here, or? No, she lives in California. She was visiting friends there in Logan, Utah. I don't know the address. And you don't know what she was doing here? She was helping a friend move. Her friend brought her daughter to me in Idaho.
Shawnee reported that Marilee had a daughter that had been taken to Shawnee by Rob Willis. Shawnee was worried about Marilee because she had a past with alcohol and drugs, and she was worried that Marilee had relapsed.
We've got missing persons. When this was passed to Logan PD, this was given to me to be the lead investigator into the missing persons case for Marilee Cox Lafferty.
We have somebody that's possibly under the influence and driving a vehicle on the roadways. We entered Marilee into a nationwide database for missing persons. Same thing for her vehicle, a gold Toyota Camry with California license plates.
We're gonna need to get statements from the family.
Detectives speak with Marilee's brother, Daryl, to get more information.
I had spoken with Shawnee. She said that Rob and Marilee had an argument. She had taken a handful of Klonopin and moonshine and left in her car, left her daughter and everything.
She would never run off like this.
I immediately felt like there was more to this than just a missing persons case. We had heard that Marilee had taken some drugs and alcohol and just disappeared.
Marilee had reportedly been sober for 9 years.
After rehab, she never touched anything ever again. There's no way. She's not grabbing a bottle, and she's not leaving her daughter. She was very protective of her.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
The thing that really stuck out to me initially was that her daughter was left behind. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. That was very concerning to me.
Investigators focused next on the man Marilee drove to Utah to visit, Rob Willis.
Marilee had come from California with her daughter to visit Rob Willis here in Hiram, which is a town just south of Logan.
Detective Woods, you Rob Willis?
That's me.
Rob told us that Marilee had come to help him move stuff into his new house. He said that she had been there on August 17th and August 18th. She had her daughter with her and her dog. At some point, they got into an argument about their relationship.
Rob said that Marilee wanted to be intimate with him, and he declined. He and Marilee had been arguing all night, and the argument continued in the morning. They went to Shane's house, where they dropped off Marilee's daughter.
Who's Shane?
Rob tells detectives that Shane Miles is his friend and co-worker.
The argument that happened between he and Marilee was outside Shane's apartment in the parking lot. Marilee had reportedly threatened to drink a bunch of alcohol and take her medication in order to end her life.
He said Marilee was very angry. She was yelling at him.
Rob and Shane had to go to work and they were going to be late, so they left.
Whose car did you leave in?
Mine. It's right there.
And they both left for work in Rob's vehicle, which is a green Isuzu Trooper.
Rob says he believed that Marilee, her daughter and Coco, would be gone by the time he and Shane returned from work.
After he left Marilee, he clocked into work at 3:42 p.m. and he was at work until he got off later that night around midnight.
Rob states that he kept getting text messages from her that were of a harassing nature because she was so angry with him.
When they went back to Shane's house, Marilee's vehicle was gone, but that Marilee's daughter was there at Shane's apartment.
They were both very surprised that Marilee's daughter was still there.
The day after Marilee's disappearance on August 19th, Rob took Marilee's daughter up to Idaho to be with Shawnee.
Look at this.
And we noticed that the back window on Rob's vehicle on the driver's side had been broken. It had glass in the back of the vehicle still, but it was kind of like he had covered it with some plastic sheeting.
What happened to the car?
He said he had backed into a tree while camping.
It had happened after she disappeared.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Investigators contact Rob's friend, Shane. He volunteers for an interview at the police department.
It's very important that we speak with Shane to see what he has to tell us, to compare that with what Rob is telling us.
All right, Shane, so obviously the reason we're talking to you today is trying to find out what happened to her, okay?
Agree.
Tell me what you know about her.
So I met her on Friday. She came with Rob.
Shane had not met Marilee until she had come to Utah to visit with Rob.
Second time when she come, she stayed out in the car, but then she got out and she come to my door and just hollering, just weird crap like, F you this, F you that.
And when was this?
This was Saturday. The last time when she come to my house, she was outside yelling.
Shane told me that he had told Rob that she can't be acting like that because he'll get in trouble with his landlord and the neighbors. They both stated that the last time they saw her was in the parking lot outside Shane's house, and that they went to work in Rob's green Isuzu Trooper.
Did you go together?
Yeah, we ride together.
Did you see Marilee leave?
No, I was in the house.
His story matched Rob's.
Investigators contact hospitals and local law enforcement to check if Marilee is receiving treatment or in custody.
We found that Marilee had not been to any hospitals in the area, and based on what we could see, she had not been arrested anywhere in the country. So we generated a missing persons flyer that we posted on our Logan City Police Department social media.
Detective Woods.
I received a phone call from one of our lieutenants.
Somebody had located a dog that was wandering around Logan City.
And they started getting messages from Marilee's family members that this dog that we had collected on the 18th of August was Marilee's dog, Coco.
That was concerning because her family reported Marilee would never leave her dog, that dog was always by her side.
Where exactly did you say you found the dog?
That this dog that we had collected was found at TTM Technologies.
TTM Technologies is a company that manufactures electronic components.
There's no real connection to Marilee.
We went to TTM and we asked for surveillance video.
We knew the dog was on film at about 4:42 p.m. What we're hoping to find on this camera is how the dog got to TTM.
Hold it. That's Coco.
We first saw the dog on the camera at 4:42 p.m. on August 18th. The dog is just running around the parking lot like it was by itself. We know Marilee shouldn't have been far away from there, but it didn't seem like Marilee was close by based on the way the dog was acting. A little bit later, the person that had found the dog, we see them pull up in a vehicle, and then we see that person pick up the dog and leave.
Investigators review the footage from TTM's other surveillance cameras to trace Coco's movements before she is found.
At 4:24 p.m., we see the dog sniffing around one of the exterior doors close up to the building.
Do it again.
We still haven't seen anything on camera besides the dog, and so we keep working backwards to see, is there any more surveillance footage that might show something? We see somebody enter the frame wearing a dark shirt, walk towards the door, and someone follows right behind him wearing a white shirt. And as they open the door and enter the building, they both kind of look back.
You can see that it is both Shane and Rob that are on video.
And then just seconds later is when we see the dog follow right behind them. TTM is where Shane Miles and Rob Willis worked. So it was not suspicious that we saw Rob and Shane on the camera footage there at work.
But what was unusual is that Marilee's dog was also on video in proximity to them. That information was crucial. How was the dog located at the workplace for Rob and Shane when Rob had told us that the dog had gone with Marilee?
We start to think maybe Rob and Shane know more information than what they're telling us, and we need to keep looking into that.
Both Rob and Shane told investigators they arrived at work shortly after 3:40 p.m., 1 hour before Coco is found at TTM.
They didn't leave work at all for the duration of their shift until sometime around midnight.
The investigators review the TTM parking lot footage from 3:40 p.m. to pinpoint Rob and Shane's arrival.
That's them.
At 3:46, we see Shane and Rob walking through the parking lot towards the building.
Roll backwards.
We then want to see them enter the parking lot to see what vehicle they're in.
So Rob and Shane had told us that they had come to work in Rob's green Isuzu Trooper, but we didn't see his vehicle. Until that. At 3:46 p.m., we see a black Ford Mustang.
Can't be sure it's them. Is there a camera on the back lot?
You can follow it on video through the parking lot all the way to the point where they park.
Play on. Freeze there.
We could see Shane and Rob exit the Mustang.
When we saw that they had arrived in Shane's Mustang and not in Rob's Trooper, we weren't quite sure what to think of that, and so we needed to investigate that further. They both told us they were at work and didn't leave, so we want to watch and see if that's another thing that they're misleading us on.
Fast forward.
We carried on watching it because we knew the dog had arrived at that building.
At 4:06 p.m., we see them leave the parking lot driving Shane's vehicle.
This directly contradicts what they both told us, that they'd never left work that day.
And so we start to wonder, where are they going?
Approximately 20 minutes after they left work that afternoon, they arrived back in Shane's black Ford Mustang. They park in a different spot this time, and that spot is not actually on camera. So we're not able to see them exit the vehicle at that time. However, within seconds after parking, we do pick them up on surveillance again, walking on TTM property. But this time, the dog is within feet of them.
It is very, very suspicious that they have the dog, but Marilee's nowhere to be seen. We have two people that know something that they're not telling us.
We knew they were lying, and we knew that we had to build a case.
On September 1st, we got some information back from Marilee's cell phone provider showing her most recent cell phone locations.
What have we got? Can you pull that up on a map?
One of the ping locations that we got on Marilee's cell phone was at 1:31 p.m. on August 18th, the day that she went missing. And it showed in the area of Blacksmith Fork Canyon, which is near Rob's residence.
What about the later ping?
One of the other cell phone ping locations we had on Marilee's cell phone was at 2:16 p.m. in the area of 1700 South, the US 8991 highway intersection, which is in Logan, near Shane's apartment. The second cell phone ping was suspicious to us because it was in the city where there is good cell phone service. It's possible that her phone could have died, but Rob also told us that she had been sending him text messages later in the day. And so the fact that 2:16 p.m. is her final cell phone ping is again another inconsistency with what Rob is telling us. It made us believe that something was seriously wrong with her.
The feeling I had was something sinister had happened. I believe Marilee was no longer alive.
Our biggest lead at this time would be Rob and Shane. Up until that point, they've shown that they're not willing to tell us the truth. They're willing to mislead us on certain things. So we start to conduct surveillance on Shane and Rob.
Investigators secure permission to attach a covert GPS tracker to Rob's vehicle.
What we were hoping to obtain by placing the tracker on Rob's vehicle were his movements. Where was he going? Did he have somewhere that might lead us to Marilee? And that's what we really wanted to know. On the evening of September 8th, I was contacted by our on-duty patrol supervisor. He informed me that Marilee's vehicle had been found in Boise, Idaho, near the airport.
We did confirm that her vehicle was located at an extended stay hotel in Boise, Idaho, which from Logan, Utah is about a 5 or 6 hour drive.
When I got that call, it was actually exhilarating because I knew that we had our vehicle. We had this huge piece of evidence we'd been looking for. Unfortunately, they did not have surveillance of their parking lot. So we don't know how the vehicle got there or who parked it there.
Some of Marilee's family did live in Idaho, not too far from that area. And so we thought maybe she had driven up that way because she had family or friends up there that she wanted to visit. So we talked with Marilee's brother up in Idaho.
When I heard that the vehicle was found, a tinge of hope kind of goes through you, like, okay, maybe she was coming back.
Is there any sign of her yet?
But it didn't add up that she would go back to Boise, she would leave her daughter and her dog even, and then also not try to get in contact with her family.
No, I haven't heard from her at all.
When she'd come to visit in town, she would visit everybody while she was here.
No one had seen her. No one had talked to her.
Investigators received data from the tracker they attached to Rob's vehicle.
On September 7th, we saw that Rob took a trip in his vehicle up into the mountains. That was of interest to us because one of the last cell phone pings from Marilee's cell phone was near the base of one of the canyons.
Marilee's been missing for over 3 weeks. We know there's been no movement on any of her records. The GPS information gave us that he was in the canyon for approximately 3 hours. It can tell us exactly everywhere he stopped.
One of the locations where Rob has stopped at the longest, I think he was in that area for about 23 minutes. So following Rob's trip into the mountains, we took our own trip up there. We found broken glass that looked like it might have been from a vehicle window. Rob told us he'd gone on a camping trip after Marilee's disappearance into the mountains, and that it was on that camping trip that his vehicle window got broken. Maybe it did happen after Marilee disappeared, but maybe it also had something to do with her disappearance, and maybe this is where she was last seen.
We went and thoroughly searched to see if we could find any sign of Marilee or any kind of evidence that would lead us to where she might be. Unfortunately, though, we found no evidence of Marilee. We know that her phone pinged outside Blacksmith Fork Canyon, and then shortly after, it pinged at 1700 South, a known route that Rob used, and that it never had activity again.
One of the businesses along that route was a gas station that had surveillance cameras.
Detectives secure CCTV footage from the gas station for August 18th. They review it at the police department.
The camera angle that we obtained from Maverick mainly shows their parking lot and their gas pumps. But in the very top of the camera angle, you can see the Highway 165. And so we're really only focused on that top part of the camera angle.
It takes a lot of manpower to go through hours of video for what you end up finding is just small sections, maybe seconds or possibly minutes of video you actually need.
At 10:50, we see Rob's Isuzu Trooper travel south.
The driver was wearing a white t-shirt, which is what Rob was wearing as he entered TTM to go to work later on that day.
He's traveling towards Hiram. He lives in Hiram, so it's possible he's going towards his house, but he's also going towards the area near the mouth of Blacksmith Fork Canyon.
We continue to scour the surveillance video for that morning.
Jump back.
At 2:13 p.m., we see Rob's vehicle on the surveillance footage show up. This time it's traveling north on Highway 165 past the Maverick. Whether Marilee is in the vehicle or not, we don't know, but we don't see her vehicle at all in the surveillance footage. We know that Marilee's cell phone pinged at 2:16, about 3 minutes north of where we saw his vehicle on surveillance. We know that most likely her cell phone is in that vehicle.
Punch in on the back of the car.
The quality is not very good, but we're able to see the windows on the vehicle, whether there's a reflection. At 10:50, we can see that the window on his Trooper is intact. At 2:13 p.m., when it goes back the other way, the window looks completely different. You know, there's no reflection at all. We're able to see that the window on his vehicle is now smashed. Rob was lying to us. His vehicle window was damaged and broken the day of Marilee's disappearance.
What happened to Rob's vehicle? Why did this window become broken in this time frame? How did it get broken? We know that just shortly after this, within minutes, Marilee's phone no longer has activity.
We keep watching the surveillance footage to see what else we might find.
Show that again.
And at about 2:55 p.m., we see Rob's vehicle again past the Maverick.
Punch in.
He's traveling south towards his home in Hiram.
We know that he was at work about an hour after that. We know that Rob most likely will pass through again on his way back to Logan, where he goes to work later. At 3:09 p.m., we see Rob's vehicle again travel north past the Maverick,
Go closer.
This time, though, there's something different. We can see that the driver is not wearing a white shirt. The driver is wearing a darker colored shirt.
Stop.
Just a few seconds later, we see a vehicle that looks like a gold Toyota Camry. It looks like Marilee's vehicle, and it passes north, almost directly behind Rob's vehicle. Rob told us that he last saw Marilee and the vehicle in Logan at Shane's apartment.
Punch in.
The thing about that gold Camry that we saw was the driver was wearing a white shirt. So we were very suspicious that Rob was driving Marilee's vehicle at that time. The driver of Rob's vehicle was wearing a dark shirt. We were almost certain that it was Shane driving the vehicle because we had Shane on surveillance later that day wearing a dark shirt.
So where is Marilee?
We didn't see anything that would indicate there was a passenger in either vehicle. However, we couldn't be certain just because of the quality of the video.
Marilee has been missing for 3 weeks. Her friends and family struggle to come to terms with her disappearance.
It was a constant battle where you knew something was very wrong, very bad, but you still want to try to convince yourself that this still could be okay. I was cautious of Rob from the very beginning. She had told me about how he was abusive, both verbal and attempts at physical abuse.
Rob didn't sound right, and she could do 100% better. And then when she came up missing, that was just my gut went straight to that guy did something to her.
At this point in the investigation, we're almost certain that some type of foul play has been involved, that she's no longer alive. We had evidence against Rob, but we also had evidence against Shane, who is most likely to tell us the truth.
Investigators invite Shane to the police department for a second time.
We determined that Shane, if we confronted him with the evidence, that he most likely would help us with the investigation.
So did you guys take Rob's car to work that day?
Rob's vehicle.
Did you ever leave work at all?
No.
Shane again stuck to his story that they left in Rob's green Isuzu Trooper, which we knew was a false statement. He said that they had arrived at work and they had never left, which we knew was a false statement. Shane said that he had never known about Marilee's dog or that she even had a dog, which clearly we knew was a false statement.
I see Shane who's covering for Rob. Because all this stuff you told me today, I can prove that you lied to me.
What do you mean I've lied to you, honestly?
Shane, I know that day that you left TTM. I know that day you were in your vehicle. And I know that you had the dog with you. And that's all on camera.
I began to show still photos from surveillance video to Shane to confront him about his lies.
Whose vehicle was that?
It's my vehicle.
That's the day she went missing.
Okay.
You're in your vehicle. See those times? Those are the times you left work 20 minutes after getting there. And when you returned, Shane?
That's because I go to Paco's Tacos all the time.
You just told me you never left that day. And when you return, her dog is seen on camera with you and Rob.
It was at this point in time that Shane started to crumble.
I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm just scared what to say because I'm scared he's going to do something to me and my kids. I'm being honest with you.
We're going to help you with that.
Shane was obviously scared. I think he was afraid of Rob Willis and what Rob had committed and entangled Shane in. Shane does admit that he helps Rob move Marilee's vehicle to the Paco's Tacos parking lot, just a few blocks west of TTM.
How did he get rid of her car? What did he tell you? And Shane, if you had a part in that, you need to be honest with me right now.
I'm not. I know he took it down somewhere. I don't know where.
I still needed to know how it got up to Boise. Shane denied moving it to Boise.
Who did he say went with him? Because you can't take two cars that far. I already have the car, Shane. Tell me who it is, Shane.
His name's Jordan.
Jordan?
Mm-hmm.
What's Jordan's last name?
I have no idea. I've only met him once.
Shane told us that Jordan had been a coworker with Rob and Shane previously, and that's how he knew him.
Search the database for anybody named Jordan that fits this description.
He did describe some very distinct and unique tattoos that Jordan had on his face.
He's got a rap sheet.
It fits the profile of somebody else that might have been involved in Marilee's disappearance.
It's important at this point in time that we speak to Jordan. Because if Jordan took Marilee's vehicle to Boise, I need to know the circumstances behind that.
Police officers detain Jordan and bring him back to the police department for questioning.
You ever heard the name Marilee Cox Lafferty?
I have never heard that name before.
She's this missing lady that we've been looking for about a month. You recognize her at all?
No, not at all.
Never heard that name at all?
No, I don't even know how I would be even involved with her.
Okay. Well, she had this little gold Toyota. And that's why you're here.
I asked him about his involvement with Rob Willis.
You ever been up to Boise with him?
I did. I took a trip with him up to Boise.
When was that?
4 weeks ago.
How'd you get there?
I drove his girlfriend's car up there.
Okay. Because right now he's implicated you in a murder.
Implicated me?
By moving her car. And that's why I'm trying to figure out how deeply you're involved.
Rob told him it was a girlfriend's vehicle and he was just going to go drop it off for him and that Rob would pick him up in Boise. We knew that Rob was the one responsible for Marilee's death and he had used these other people to help cover up his crime. At that point in time, the only thing I could think about was that we needed to pick up Rob. We couldn't have him out in public any longer.
And all I want to do is find her, let her daughter bury her mother. And I want to give you a chance to dig yourself out of this hole.
So you want me to get from Rob anything I can get? Is that what you're asking?
I want you to tell me the truth about everything right now.
Tell you the truth about what?
About what you know.
I don't know anything.
What does Rob
doesn't tell me.
Detective Woods turns up the heat to get Shane to reveal what happened to Marilee.
Where is she, Shane?
She's here.
Where?
Up the canyon somewhere.
Were you there?
No.
Who was with him when he did it?
He's by himself. He was with her.
How'd he kill her?
I think he beat her to death.
Did he say it with what?
He just said things like this.
At this point, when Shane tells us this, that's our biggest piece of evidence that we're looking for. Shane led us to a location up Blacksmith Fork Canyon near a pretty remote camping site. I was very hopeful that this would be the end of the investigation.
Shane said that Rob had taken him up there to the specific point and said, she's down there. He believed that this was a scare tactic, that, look, if you tell anybody, this is what's going to happen to you as well.
In the immediate area of the campsite, there was a tree, and underneath the tree, there was a lot of broken glass.
There was also glass embedded in a tree branch that was the same height, relatively, as Rob's vehicle.
Also in this area was a bracelet that had the scorpion charm on it, and I knew that Marilee was a Scorpio, and so I was pretty certain that was her bracelet.
I went downhill. I'm looking around, I'm trying to find anything, when I get the distinct odor of decomposition. I start moving towards what I see as an unnatural rock formation underneath a tree. We moved one rock and we could see a human foot underneath the rock pile. And we knew that we had found Marilee finally.
I don't think anyone's ever prepared to come across human remains like that. Marilee had been in the mountains, buried up there for about a month.
Marilee was able to be identified positively by her fingerprints.
Marilee's daughter was staying at my house. I just told her that they found her and that she was dead. And she screamed, and she just curled in a ball and cried and cried and cried. It broke my heart so much.
I remember when I got the phone call that they had found her and confirming everything that I didn't want confirmed. That was one of the hardest days of my life, to have to come to reality that she was gone.
I wanted to hold her hand. I wanted to be a big sister, and I wanted to take it away. I would have traded her places in a heartbeat because she fought so hard to be the better person that she was being.
Rob Willis was placed under arrest in Hiram by a SWAT team on the afternoon of September 14th. I knew I had another large task in front of me in trying to get some sort of confession from Rob.
How much do you care about her?
Not that I was thinking about starting a life with her.
Is that before you killed her?
What?
Is that before you killed her, Rob?
I didn't kill her.
You did. Rob, and we're gonna prove it.
I didn't think he would tell me much. When I tried to confront him, he still deflected.
We found her.
And?
And your DNA is gonna be on her, Rob. I know you killed her, Rob. You know.
I didn't kill
I think you just lost control.
When I finally told him that we had recovered Marilee and confronted him and told him that we knew he was responsible, Rob requested an attorney. And at that point, the interrogation ended.
Take me to jail. I'm done.
You can sit down a bit.
Investigators pieced together the events they believe led to Marilee's murder.
Rob and Marilee are arguing about their relationship and then went for a drive and went up into the mountains.
We believe Rob entered the canyon area with Marilee and her dog in Rob's vehicle. At some point in time, there is a fight that occurs. Rob's window became broken.
We're still not certain exactly how Rob killed Marilee, but it was most likely due to some blunt force trauma. Rob had then moved a lot of rocks to cover up her body. Once Rob killed Marilee, he left the mountains.
He returns to Shane's house and he tells Shane what he did.
So he now has to cover up what happened. At that point, Rob realized Marilee's car is at his house.
We then know that him and Shane left Shane's house to go back out to Hiram.
They take Marilee's car, Shane driving Rob's vehicle and Rob driving Marilee's vehicle.
Rob dumps Marilee's car at Paco's Tacos with Marilee's dog, Coco, inside it. Rob and Shane then drive to work in Shane's Mustang.
20 or 30 minutes after arriving, they left TTM on the way to Paco's Tacos to get Marilee's dog from the vehicle.
And they arrived back at TTM a short time later now with Marilee's dog.
And then the next day, Rob took Marilee's daughter up to be with Shawnee. Rob threatened Jordan to get him to cooperate so that Jordan would drive Marilee's vehicle from Logan up to Boise, Idaho to dispose of it up there, most likely trying to throw us off the track, trying to make us think that Marilee had driven up there to see family. I think Rob did believe that he was going to get away with it because he had tried to dispose of all the evidence. We were not able to prove that Jordan intentionally obstructed the investigation by moving Marilee's vehicle. With Shane, we knew that he had intentionally misled us and obstructed the investigation, but we also had a reasonable belief that Rob had threatened his life and threatened him to participate with the obstruction.
Shane was a very key witness to this homicide investigation and directly responsible for our recovery of her body. Rob never would have told us that.
Jordan Larson and Shane Miles are charged with no crimes in relation to Marilee's death. Rob Willis pleads guilty to first-degree felony murder. He is sentenced to 15 years to life.
CCTV played a massive role in this case. As soon as we knew that the dog was located on that footage, we knew that they were lying because of the CCTV. And from there, we were able to build a case and build it with more CCTV. Bringing the dog back to TTM was a crucial misstep on his part.
Every day when I see something beautiful in nature, I think about her. I think about her, wanting to get her camera out and take a picture of it and to preserve that memory. I miss talking to her, and I'm so proud to be her brother.
Miley was my forever friend. She came in and made me feel balanced and understood. I'll never be able to replace her in my life, ever. She's just one of a kind.
Next time on See No Evil.
911. There was just a shot fired. A man was just shot.
This was actually a planned out murder execution.
You want to tell us the truth?
Surveillance video does not lie.
The smell of dust lingered in the dimly lit corner of the storage unit. No one could have predicted it, not even the seasoned detectives who once thought they'd seen it all. But there it was, a forgotten box, buried under layers of time and debris. The kind of box you might ignore on any given day. The kind of box you wouldn't give a second thought to, until now. Until a break in the case finally pulled it from the shadows. After more than 2 decades, the truth was waiting there, hidden under forgotten papers, in a box so ordinary it seemed almost too absurd to believe. But that's how these things go. They linger, they wait for the right moment to emerge. It was the winter of 2005 when 24-year-old Lisa Daniels disappeared. No struggle, no trace, just gone. She had vanished from the sleepy town of Sparks, Nevada, without so much as a whisper. In the days that followed, the community was left to piece together a puzzle with no pieces. Lisa's family, desperate and broken, plastered every available surface with her smiling face. "Have you seen me?" the posters asked. Hundreds of leads were followed. A witness claimed to have seen a van near the scene. Another spoke of a man who left town shortly after her disappearance, but nothing. No body, no arrest, just silence. Months turned into years, and with each passing day, Lisa's case grew colder. The town moved on, life continued, and the case became a shadow of the past. The investigation stagnated. It became just another cold case, sitting in a file waiting for someone, anyone, to pick it back up. But in this line of work, time is both the enemy and the key, because sometimes the longer a case sits, the closer it gets to unraveling. It was in the fall of 2023, almost 2 decades after Lisa's disappearance, that a retired investigator working through old records as part of a routine check stumbled across something that would change everything. A dusty storage box buried deep in the archives of the police department, just another forgotten relic. But as the investigator opened it, a surge of possibility electrified the room. The box contained nothing extraordinary on the surface, just old case files, photographs, and old, yellowed evidence that had been collected during the investigation. But one photograph stood out. It was a shot of a van, parked on the side of a remote road, taken during the search. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, just another potential lead that had never panned out. But the handwriting on the back, a name that had slipped through the cracks all those years ago. The name was familiar, too familiar. As the investigator traced the name through the old records, a chilling realization settled in. The man behind the name had been a suspect in another case, one that had been closed, buried, forgotten. It was a case of a young woman, a similar disappearance from the years before Lisa's. Another cold case, another forgotten name. The dots began to connect, but it was more than just a link to the past. It was the opening of Pandora's box. This wasn't just a random photograph. This was the key to a buried history, one that had been intentionally hidden, a trail of secrets no one had dared to uncover. The more the investigator dug, the clearer it became. The disappearance of Lisa Daniels was not an isolated event. There were others, not just the one woman whose name had surfaced, but others too. A string of disappearances, each one eerily similar. But no one had ever connected them. Each case had been treated as an isolated incident, but the pattern was undeniable now. Lisa was the latest in a long list, a list no one had dared to look at until now. The truth was there, right in front of them. All these years, all the time wasted, but the trail was never fully erased. It was all coming back, piece by piece. And what was buried, what had remained untouched, was about to come to the surface. A dusty storage box, an old photograph, and a name. That was all it took to reignite a case that had long since been written off. But the killer was still out there, somewhere in the shadows. They had remained free for so long, walking away as the years passed. They had slipped through the cracks, using time as a shield. But they hadn't won. Not yet. This wasn't over. The news spread quickly, faster than anyone could anticipate. It was almost too unreal. The case that had haunted the town of Sparks for nearly 2 decades was suddenly alive again, breathing with a new, fiery urgency. It wasn't just Lisa's family that had been waiting for answers. Everyone in the community had felt the weight of her absence. The disappearance of a young woman, one so full of promise, had rippled through every corner of the town. It was more than just a cold case, it was a wound that had never healed, and now, in the stillness of that archive, the first spark of hope had been ignited. As the lead investigator, Michael Harris, began to connect the dots, it became clear that Lisa wasn't the first victim of this predator. He traced the names back to the early 90s, to a similar case in a neighboring town. A woman named Tara Moretti had vanished without a trace. Her family had suffered, their grief buried beneath layers of unanswered questions. In the years that followed, the case was eventually shelved, lost in the shuffle of time. But now, after all these years, Harris realized the truth. Tara, like Lisa, had been a victim of the same predator. A predator who had evaded the law, leaving no trace, no leads, just the empty spaces where young women once stood. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that they had been so close back then. There had been moments in Tara's case when the truth had almost come to light. Witnesses who had seen a man acting suspiciously near her home, an anonymous tip-off that had led nowhere. The investigation had been a tangled mess of dead ends and false leads, but in hindsight, the clues had been there all along. This wasn't just about Lisa. It was about a pattern, a dark thread that wove through the years, connecting these women in a way no one had dared to see. The investigation team grew, the weight of the case pressing down on them like a tangible force. But each new discovery felt like another layer of the mystery peeling away, revealing a deeper, more chilling truth. They now had a suspect, a man named Derek Carr, who had been in the vicinity of both Lisa's and Tara's disappearances. Carr wasn't just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. He was someone who had been involved in every key moment of both cases. A man whose name kept appearing, hidden in the margins of every investigation in ways that couldn't be ignored. Carr had been a local mechanic, a fixture in the community for years. He was a man no one had ever suspected, quiet, unobtrusive, always friendly with the locals. But there was something about him that never quite added up. No one ever saw him at night. No one ever saw him when the disappearances happened. But his alibis were always airtight. He had slipped through the cracks. Always. Now, with the evidence piling up, the team knew they had to move quickly. Carr had vanished after Lisa's disappearance, leaving town without so much as a word. His disappearance seemed like just another dead end, another clue that went cold. But now they knew he hadn't disappeared. He had escaped. The investigation wasn't just a hunt for a killer anymore. It was a race against time. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Carr wasn't just a suspect. He was the key, a key that could unlock the entire web of secrets stretching back years. But Carr had disappeared again. Harris and his team scoured the old files, every piece of paper, every scrap of evidence from Lisa's case and Tara's. They retraced every step of the investigation, following leads that had been dismissed as irrelevant at the time. There was one name, one detail that kept haunting Harris, Carr's estranged sister Megan, who had told a story years ago that no one had paid attention to. She had mentioned something odd, something about her brother's late-night activities, something that didn't quite make sense back then. Megan had been living out of state for years, but Harris knew this was the break they needed. He called her immediately. The conversation with Megan Carr was strange. She had never fully believed her brother was involved, not until now. She admitted that she had been haunted by a memory. Her brother, coming home late one night, covered in dirt, his eyes wild with fear. She didn't know what he had been doing, but she knew he hadn't been at home. It was a detail she had buried deep, something she had never shared, until now. Megan's words were a revelation, and they sent a shockwave through the team. Carr hadn't just disappeared after Lisa's death. He had been hiding, watching, waiting. And then, something unexpected happened. The phone rang. It was a tip from a local truck driver who remembered seeing a man who matched Carr's description in a small town on the outskirts of Nevada. He hadn't seen the man in years, but recalled his face distinctly from the days when he used to frequent the area for work. It was the break they needed. The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The tip-off from the truck driver had ignited a renewed sense of urgency. Detective Harris and his team scrambled to track down Derek Carr, but as always, he seemed to be just one step ahead, slipping through their fingers as they chased shadows. He hadn't been in the small town for long, just long enough to leave a trail, just long enough to remind them how close they were to catching him. But that's how it always goes in a case like this. The closer you get to the truth, the more elusive it becomes. They searched his last known addresses, combed through old contacts, and tracked down every lead. But Carr was nowhere to be found. It was almost as though he had vanished again, just like the last time. The walls were closing in, and Harris knew they couldn't afford to lose this chance. Each piece of evidence led them closer, but it was a slow, painful crawl. The deeper they dug, the more twisted it all became. There was a new sense of dread now, a feeling that they were not just chasing a killer, but something darker, something that had been festering for years. They were no longer simply investigating a cold case. They were unraveling a nightmare that had been carefully crafted, hidden in plain sight for far too long. Harris couldn't ignore the sensation creeping up his spine, the feeling that they were running out of time. Carr was out there, somewhere. They could feel his presence, lurking just beyond their reach. It was as though he was taunting them, daring them to uncover the truth. And as each day passed, the weight of the case became heavier, suffocating in its intensity. Then a breakthrough. A phone call from a surveillance company in a neighboring county, a grainy image, a man walking with purpose, wearing a heavy coat and a hat pulled low over his face. The camera wasn't clear enough to confirm it was Carr, but the location, the place it was taken, was too specific to ignore. It was a small, secluded cabin on the outskirts of a town called Elko, Nevada, just miles from where Lisa had disappeared. Harris and his team immediately made plans to investigate. The cabin had been abandoned for years, but they knew it was worth a shot. They couldn't let this lead slip away. Not when they were so close to unraveling the mystery. As they arrived at the cabin, the air felt different, cold, still, the kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. There was a sense that something wasn't right, like they were walking into a trap. They moved cautiously, checking every corner, every window. The cabin appeared empty, abandoned, but there was something in the air that told them otherwise. It wasn't until they entered the back room that they found it, the unmistakable scent of decay. It was faint, but it was enough. They followed the smell, and there, behind an old wooden chest, they found it, the thing that had eluded them for so long. A diary. The pages were yellowed, brittle with age, but the words on them were unmistakable. Derek Carr's handwriting. And the entries? Chilling. They detailed every victim, every step he had taken, his every move. I took her in the night, just like the others. She fought, but it was over too quickly. They never see me coming. They never hear the van. The words sent a shockwave through the team. They were no longer just chasing a man. They were chasing the ghost of a killer, someone who had spent years hiding in plain sight, leaving a trail of victims across the state. Carr had been meticulous. The diary revealed his careful planning, his obsession with the disappearances. He had kept track of every detail, every movement. It was a map of his psyche, and now, after all these years, the team had a glimpse inside that dark mind. As Harris flipped through the pages, the last entry caught his eye. It's almost time. She'll be next. The chilling words sent a cold wave through him. Who was she? Was it someone they knew? Someone close to the case? Or was it someone entirely new, someone who had yet to be found? The thought was terrifying. They had to move fast. Time was running out. The investigation had taken a sharp turn. It wasn't just about catching Carr anymore. It was about stopping him before he could strike again. Harris's heart raced as he realized the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a killer. This was a man who had been operating under the radar for years, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake, and they had just uncovered his twisted plans. But even as they pieced together the evidence, there was still one question that lingered in the back of their minds. Where was Carr now? The clock was ticking, and the killer was still out there. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing moment. Derek Carr's handwriting haunted Harris's thoughts, each word a maddening reminder of how close they were to stopping a predator who had been playing them like a game for years. But that last entry, the one with the ominous warning, lingered in the air, a ticking clock on a case that was far from over. She'll be next. The words kept playing in Harris's head, relentless. Who was she, and why did it feel like the killer was always 2 steps ahead? The team was now racing against time, desperately trying to make sense of Carr's cryptic diary entries. There were dates, names, scattered hints about past victims, but there was still no clear pattern. The killer had been careful, meticulous in his actions. The more they examined the entries, the clearer it became that Carr had been watching, waiting, and observing every move of the authorities, each detail added to his perfect plan. But why hadn't he struck again? What had stopped him? Then came another break, a report from the small town of Elko, where the cabin was located. A local woman, an elderly resident who had lived near the cabin for years, remembered something peculiar. One late evening, she had seen a van, a nondescript white van, just like the one described in the old police records. It had been parked outside the cabin for several days, long after the place had supposedly been abandoned. The van was empty, but the woman had mentioned something that sent chills down Harris's spine. She had seen a man standing by the van, peering at her through the blinds, as if waiting for something. His face was unrecognizable, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and familiar. Harris's gut twisted. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He knew they were close. So close. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a signal. Carr was watching. He was always watching. The team traced the van's movements and discovered something they hadn't expected. Carr had never left Nevada. Not for long, anyway. His trail had been expertly hidden, buried under layers of fake identities, addresses that were barely used. But now the picture was coming into focus. His van was a ghost, a mobile base, his temporary hiding spot, a tool for blending into the background of Nevada's vast wilderness. And it was a tool he had used for years. Carr had played his part in a cat-and-mouse game, always staying under the radar, never once letting his guard down. Until now. The next tip came from an unexpected source, Carr's former girlfriend, who had cut ties with him years ago but had recently returned to Nevada after a long absence. She claimed that Carr had been in touch with her sporadically over the years. Casual messages, nothing more, until recently. Just days before the investigation reignited. In one of his last messages, he had written, "I think I'll stop now. Too much attention. I've had my fun." It was a strange statement, a confession, a withdrawal, or perhaps even a veiled threat. But the most chilling part was her last encounter with Carr. She described him as more erratic than she had ever seen him. His behavior had been unusual, even by his standards. His hands had been shaking, his eyes wild. She couldn't make sense of it, but in retrospect it all pointed to one thing. He had been spiraling out of control. The hunter was becoming desperate, and desperation, Harris knew, made killers unpredictable. Meanwhile, the team continued to unravel Carr's past. They spoke to his old acquaintances, dug through financial records, searched for any sign of his whereabouts, and there, buried under years of denial, they found it, a hidden account. It wasn't large, but it had been used recently to make a withdrawal, a small but important clue, and this was enough to pin him down, to push the investigation into its final stages. Carr had been seen at a small motel just outside of Reno, Nevada. The surveillance footage was grainy, but there he was, stepping out of the shadows and walking into a room, his face a cold mask of indifference. He had been there for days, and he had been expecting someone. The team couldn't wait any longer. They made the decision to move in. With the knowledge of his last known location, Harris led his team through the cramped motel hallways, each step louder than the last. The air felt thick with anticipation, every breath sharp with the fear that they were too late. The door to Carr's room was only inches away. Harris's heart pounded as he signaled his team to approach. The moment was finally here. Carr was inside. The door was kicked open, and there he was, sitting at the edge of the bed, his back turned. The room was eerily still. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had been waiting for them. It was unsettling. "Detective Harris," Carr said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "I knew you'd find me eventually. You always do." The words hung in the air like poison. Harris's hand hovered over his weapon as he moved closer, but there was no rush. No panic in Carr's eyes, just a cold, chilling certainty. "You know," Carr continued, looking up at Harris with a twisted smile, "I thought it would be harder to get away with it. But you always miss the small things, like that photograph, the one from the archives. It was all there, wasn't it?" Harris's blood ran cold as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. Carr hadn't just been hiding, he had been baiting them. Every step, every clue, every detail, it had all been a game to him, a game that he had played to perfection. And now the game was over. But there was no victory in the arrest, only the crushing weight of what they had uncovered. The families of the victims could never get their loved ones back. And for every step closer they came to the truth, another piece of their innocence had been shattered. As Carr was handcuffed and led away, Harris felt the finality of the case settle into him. There was no relief, only the heavy silence left in the wake of a man who had evaded justice for far too long. And somewhere, in the shadows of Nevada, the ghosts of the women he had taken would never truly rest. The arrest of Derek Carr should have been the end of it. The case was officially closed, the man responsible was behind bars, and for the families of the victims, it should have brought some semblance of closure. But there was no sense of victory, no celebration in the streets, just a haunting silence that stretched over the community like a shadow. As Carr was processed and his name made headlines, the horror of what had been uncovered still weighed heavily on Detective Harris. For years, they had all believed in the notion of justice, that if they found the killer, they would find peace. But standing there in the interrogation room with Carr, staring into the vacant eyes of a man who had taken so much from so many, Harris realized that peace was a fragile illusion. Carr sat in his cell, speaking in riddles, his twisted smile never leaving his face. Harris had thought the killer would break down, would show some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. But Carr didn't care. He didn't care about the families he had destroyed or the lives he had stolen. He had no guilt, no remorse. His eyes, cold and calculating, showed nothing but satisfaction, as if the entire nightmare was just a game to him, a game that he had won. The investigators pored over Carr's diaries, the notes, the twisted recounting of his crimes. They tried to make sense of the mind of a man who had methodically destroyed the lives of those around him. But each new detail only added to the confusion. The trail wasn't just about Lisa, it was bigger than that. Carr had been operating with precision, moving across counties, staying ahead of the law. But why had he stopped? Was it really just the attention that had forced him to lay low, or was there something more, something darker behind it? The unsettling truth began to surface, a truth that had been buried beneath layers of time, fear, and silence. Carr had never acted alone. The twisted web of his crimes wasn't just about a single man. No, there was more to it than that. Harris began to connect the dots, pushing further into the darkness, uncovering links to a network of individuals who had, over the years, shielded Carr from justice, those who had enabled him, aided him. They were out there, still hiding in the shadows, still operating in the periphery of the investigation. Carr had been the face of it all, the killer, the manipulator. But the truth was even more chilling. There were others. The thought sank into Harris's chest like a weight that he couldn't escape. This wasn't just one man's depravity. It was a much larger, more insidious thing. People had known, they had seen the signs, and they had allowed it to continue. Carr, when finally pushed in the interrogation room, spoke of his partners as though they were irrelevant. His tone, casual, almost dismissive. "I was just the one who did the work," he said. "You think I could have gotten away with it for so long without help? You should know better than that." His laugh echoed in the cold, sterile room. "They were just too careful. You'll never find them." Harris's stomach twisted as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The investigation deepened. Harris and his team shifted their focus, tracing Carr's movements over the years, looking for anyone who might have helped him, anyone who might have been involved. They began interviewing witnesses again, the ones who had once been dismissed. One by one, their stories started to piece together. A vague memory here, a whispered conversation there, all pointing to one conclusion. Carr had been part of something much bigger, something more horrifying than anyone had imagined. But the further they dug, the more dangerous the game became. The connections were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, but every lead seemed to vanish just before it could be fully followed. A name would appear, then disappear, an address would be given, only to lead to a dead end. It was as though the people who had aided Carr had already disappeared into the fabric of the town, blending in, hiding in plain sight. And then came the chilling phone call. Harris stood frozen as the voice on the other end spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "You're not looking hard enough." The words were clear, precise, calculated. "You think this is over? Carr's not the only one you need to worry about. You've only scratched the surface. The real game is just beginning." The voice hung up before Harris could respond. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the receiver back on the hook. The phone call felt like a warning. It wasn't just Carr who had evaded justice. It was a whole network of people who had been operating in the shadows for years. And now they were watching him, watching all of them. And then came the most haunting realization of all. Carr hadn't stopped. He hadn't been caught because he had simply gotten too old or too sick. He had stopped because he knew the truth was going to come for him. And so he had waited, biding his time, building his network, knowing that one day someone would come looking for him. But he also knew this. It wasn't over yet. The real predator, the one behind the mask, was still out there. Harris couldn't shake the feeling that he had entered something much darker than just a cold case. The killer had been the first piece to fall, but now the entire system was starting to crack. The truth was out there, but it was more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They had only just begun to uncover what had been buried for so long. As Harris looked out over the darkened town of Sparks, he realized that the game was far from over. The truth was still waiting, and someone, somewhere, was still watching. The silence that followed was heavy. Harris sat alone in his office, the late hours of the night pressing in around him. The weight of everything they had uncovered, everything they had yet to uncover, sat like a thick fog in his mind. Derek Carr was in custody, but Harris knew deep down that the worst was still ahead. They had brought down the monster, but the real challenge was just beginning. Who were the people behind Carr? Who were the ones that had enabled him for all these years? Carr's smug demeanor during his arrest had been chilling, but the phone call, the warning, had shaken Harris to his core. He was no longer just chasing a man. He was chasing a ghost, a network of shadows that had remained hidden for too long. The deeper they dug, the more complex the case became. Each lead, each clue, seemed to open up a whole new set of questions. Every answer they uncovered only revealed more about the twisted web Carr had woven, one that no one had been able to see. The team worked tirelessly, going through Carr's old contacts, revisiting witnesses who had been too afraid to speak up all those years ago. They dug into his past, finding inconsistencies, hidden patterns, and traces of someone far more calculated than they had originally believed. They had been so focused on the killer that they had missed the bigger picture. Now they were uncovering a criminal network, a hidden society that had been pulling the strings from the shadows, manipulating, controlling, and hiding Carr's darkest actions. It was hard to explain the way the pieces started to fit together. The missing women, the unexplained disappearances that stretched across years, even across states. It was more than just the work of one deranged mind. Carr was the one who had carried out the killings, yes. But someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting for the right moment to take advantage of Carr's thirst for power, for control. And now that Harris had started asking questions, those people, the ones who had been lurking in the dark, had begun to notice. Carr's diary, once thought to be the most damning piece of evidence, had turned out to be more of a roadmap than a confession. It was full of names, scattered across different years, different places. The names didn't always seem connected, but now Harris knew they were. Carr had been involved with more people than anyone realized, each person playing their part in a larger, more sinister game. They had known each other, they had communicated, they had helped each other. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The case had gone from one man's horrific actions to something far more terrifying. This wasn't just about a killer. This was about a group of people who had operated with impunity, who had manipulated the system, who had hidden in plain sight. The thought of it made his stomach churn. The trail was cold, but it was there. The problem was they didn't know where to look next. But they were getting closer. One piece of luck came in the form of an old acquaintance of Carr's, a man named Vincent Caldwell, a former associate who had disappeared from the radar years ago. Caldwell had been a part of the same circle Carr had run in, but his name had never surfaced during the investigation. Now, Harris had been given a lead that placed Caldwell in the vicinity of the last known disappearance, just days before Lisa Daniels had been taken. Harris reached out to Caldwell's former colleagues, piecing together the last remnants of his trail. The more he dug, the clearer it became that Caldwell had been a key figure in the network, someone who had been involved in everything but had kept his hands clean, staying in the shadows while others did the dirty work. It was Caldwell who had recruited the others, who had kept the network going, who had organized the disappearances, and watched Carr work his macabre magic from afar. But the question still remained, where was Caldwell now? He had vanished just as mysteriously as Carr had, leaving behind nothing but whispers and unanswered questions. The breakthrough came when Harris received a tip-off from an informant, an anonymous source who claimed to have seen Caldwell in a small town near the Nevada border not far from Elko. The source was hesitant, afraid to give up too much information, but the mention of Caldwell's name had set off alarm bells in Harris's head. This was the break they had been waiting for. Harris gathered his team once more, this time ready to move in with everything they had. But this time, there was no more room for mistakes. If Caldwell was behind Carr, if he was truly the puppet master, then catching him was the only thing that mattered. The town near Elko, where they had tracked Caldwell's last known location, was small, isolated, perfect for someone like him, someone who knew how to hide in plain sight. The drive felt endless, the anticipation gnawing at Harris with every mile. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. He wasn't sure if Caldwell would be waiting for them, if he'd already slipped away, or if they were about to find something far more disturbing than they could have imagined. But as they arrived in the quiet, desolate town, the weight of it all crashed down on Harris once more. The case had been a long, hard road, but this was the point of no return. Whatever they were about to find would change everything. They parked outside a rundown motel at the edge of town, the place where Caldwell had last been seen. The streets were empty, quiet, as though the entire town had been holding its breath. Harris's heart raced as he signaled to his team to stay alert. They approached the motel, their footsteps echoing in the silence. And then they saw him. Vincent Caldwell was standing by the door, his back turned, facing the distant horizon. He didn't turn as Harris and his team approached, his posture still, as if he had been waiting for them all along. "I knew you'd come," Caldwell said without turning around. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if this moment had been inevitable. "Took you long enough?" The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. Caldwell didn't flinch, he didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence except for the cold, deliberate calmness in his voice. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life, waiting for Harris and his team to finally catch up to him. And they had. The quiet of the motel room was suffocating, heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Harris took a cautious step forward, his hand resting on his gun, not out of fear but out of necessity. The last thing they needed now was another misstep. They had come too far to make any more mistakes. "You know why we're here," Harris said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years of unanswered questions. "This is over, Caldwell. It's time for you to come with us." Caldwell didn't respond. He continued to stare out into the distance, his face expressionless. It was as if the man wasn't even interested in the arrest, in the game that was finally ending. He was no longer the puppet master. The feeling in the room had shifted. They were no longer hunting him. Caldwell was hunting them. Harris's team moved in slowly, cautiously, but the moment they stepped inside, Caldwell's demeanor shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was something in the air, a change, a tension so thick it made the hairs on the back of their necks rise. "You've been asking the wrong questions," Caldwell finally said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "Carr was just a tool, a puppet. You think you've won because you caught him? It's funny, really. It's always the ones who think they have it all figured out that miss the real picture. Harris's mind raced, but he kept his focus. They had found him. They had him cornered. There was no more running, no more hiding. The game was over. Enough with the games, Caldwell, Harris snapped, stepping closer, his voice now firm. You're done. It's over. Caldwell didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly turned around, meeting Harris's gaze with eyes that were unsettlingly calm. You don't get it, do you? He asked, his tone almost condescending. It's never really over. You've won a battle, but you've missed the war. You've only just started to uncover the truth. The words hung in the air like a warning. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a man confessing. This wasn't just a criminal getting his comeuppance. This was something far darker, something deeper. Caldwell stepped back slowly, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to maintain control of the situation. I've spent years watching you, watching them, he continued, his voice eerily calm. The ones who are supposed to protect everyone. The ones who are supposed to bring justice. But justice is just a word. It's all a game. He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing. You think you're the ones bringing the end? You think Carr was the only one I controlled? The truth is, there are more of us. More who still haven't been caught. More who still play the game. You've only scratched the surface, Harris. You're too late. A sense of dread settled in Harris's gut. For a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. He wasn't just dealing with a killer. He was dealing with a mind that had manipulated so many, controlled so many, that Harris couldn't begin to fathom the extent of it. Caldwell's face softened, and for the first time, Harris saw a glimmer of something almost human, beneath the cold exterior. Carr was just the beginning. He had his use. He did his part. But there are others. And when you think you've got it all figured out, when you think you've caught us all, that's when we win. His words echoed in Harris's mind, chilling him to the core. Caldwell wasn't just confessing. He wasn't just giving up. He was sending a message. And Harris realized, with a sinking heart, that the message wasn't for him. It was for the rest of the world, for everyone who had thought this case was over. The arrest of Derek Carr had been a victory, but it was a hollow one. For every person they caught, for every criminal they locked away, there was always someone else, someone worse, waiting to step into their place, and Caldwell knew it. He had known it all along. Harris felt the weight of the revelation press down on him. It was like a fog had settled over the entire case, clouding his judgment. He had thought they were bringing justice, but Caldwell's words made him realize just how little he truly understood about the world they were dealing with. Do you think you've won? Caldwell's voice cut through his thoughts. Do you think this is going to end with me, that you've solved this case? Harris, this is just the start. You've opened the door. Now you're going to see what's behind it. Before Harris could react, Caldwell's face twisted into a smug smile. But it's too late. You're already too far gone. And just like that, Caldwell's smile faded, and his face hardened into a mask of calm resignation. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't worried. He had already won in his mind. The victory wasn't his arrest. It was the game itself, the manipulation, the control. The sound of the approaching sirens grew louder outside, the final confirmation of their success. Harris stood frozen, trying to process the words, trying to understand what Caldwell was truly telling him. But he couldn't. The answer eluded him, just as the truth had eluded everyone for so long. As they led Caldwell away, Harris couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding settle over him. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The case had only just begun. The air around Harris felt heavier now, suffocating almost. Caldwell had been arrested, but Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Every word Caldwell had spoken replayed in his mind, each one like a cold hand gripping at his thoughts. You've only scratched the surface, Caldwell had said, and those words rang in Harris's ears with each passing minute. Caldwell had given up his silence, but not before sending them a warning. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just another chapter. The case they thought was solved wasn't solved at all. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that this was far bigger than Derek Carr. Caldwell's confession, if it could even be called that, was just the tip of the iceberg. It took several weeks for the dust to settle after the arrest. The small town of Sparks, Nevada had been jolted awake from its long slumber, and the shadows that had crept over the community for years were finally being dragged into the light. But as Harris sat at his desk, looking over the case files once again, the one thing that still stuck in his mind was that cryptic warning from Caldwell. There were others, and they weren't done. The investigators on the team were exhausted. They'd been working tirelessly to track down leads, piece together the puzzle, and follow the trail of names and addresses Carr had left behind. But each lead felt like another dead end. The more they investigated, the more they realized that Caldwell wasn't exaggerating. There were more people involved, more connections they hadn't seen. The network of individuals who had supported Carr's sick games had gone unnoticed for so long, and now those people were out there hiding in plain sight. Then came another chilling tip, an anonymous email sent directly to Harris with only one subject line, "Look deeper." The email was brief, almost cryptic in its simplicity. There was a single address listed, no explanation, no context, just the address. It was a warehouse, abandoned, near the outskirts of Sparks. Harris couldn't ignore it. His gut told him this was something important. This could be the breakthrough they needed, the piece of the puzzle that would finally crack everything wide open. He grabbed his coat, signaled to his team, and headed out, the darkening sky overhead a reflection of the weight on his shoulders. The drive to the warehouse felt like an eternity. The landscape blurred around him as his mind raced. Every thought kept coming back to that one question. What was Caldwell hiding? What did he know that they didn't? And why had he pointed them here to this abandoned warehouse? When they arrived, Harris could feel the weight of the place before they even stepped inside. It was dark, desolate, the air thick with dust. The warehouse was empty, save for a few boxes and scattered debris, but it didn't feel empty. There was something in the air, a tension that couldn't be ignored. They carefully moved through the space, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made every footstep sound like a gunshot. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. It was just another abandoned building, another dead end, another place where the past had been left to rot. That was, until they reached the back of the warehouse. There, tucked away in a corner behind several large crates, was a small locked room. It hadn't been noticed at first, too well hidden, too far from sight. But now, as they approached, Harris's heart began to pound. This was it. He could feel it in his bones. Whatever they were about to find here was the key to everything. The door to the small room creaked as it was slowly pushed open. Inside was a sight Harris had been dreading. It wasn't just boxes or abandoned furniture, it was something far worse. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, photos of the victims, Lisa Daniels, Tara Moretti, and others whose names Harris had yet to uncover. But these weren't just ordinary photos, they were meticulously arranged. Some were enlarged, pinned to the wall like trophies. Some were pictures of the women, their faces frozen in terror, in moments just before their last breath. But that wasn't the worst part. There, in the center of the room, was a large table covered in papers. Documents, files, but they weren't just about the victims, they were about the investigators. They were about Harris and his team. Detailed, disturbingly accurate accounts of their movements, their personal lives, their weaknesses. And scattered among the papers were names of people they'd never heard of, people they hadn't even suspected, people who had been in contact with Caldwell, Carr, and others in the network, people who were still out there. Harris's blood ran cold as he realized what they were looking at. This wasn't just a collection of photos or notes, this was a dossier, a list of every person who had been involved in the operation, the ones who had enabled the killings, the ones who had watched and kept their mouths shut. But there were also new names. New connections, newer players, people who were still operating, still moving behind the scenes, still hidden, and one name stood out above all others. It was a name Harris didn't recognize at first, but it sent a shiver down his spine when he saw it. Victor Haley. It was a name that would change everything. Haley was listed as a key player, someone with a deep connection to the operations, someone who had worked with Caldwell, and this name wasn't just a random entry. Haley's involvement went back further than anyone had realized. He wasn't just a part of Carr's past, he was someone who had orchestrated things on a much larger scale, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to resurface. As Harris stared at the name, a cold realization hit him. They were no longer dealing with a man who had been hiding in plain sight. They were dealing with a network, one that was still active, still operating, and still in the shadows. The game was far from over. The killer might be behind bars, but the war was just beginning. The name Victor Haley burned into Harris's mind like a brand. It was a name that seemed to hold the weight of every unanswered question, every twisted secret they had uncovered over the past few weeks. Haley wasn't just another link in the chain. He was something far more dangerous. A mastermind, a puppet master, a name that had been deliberately buried beneath layers of deceit. As Harris studied the documents and photographs in front of him, a gnawing feeling settled deep in his stomach. This wasn't just about solving one case. This was about dismantling an entire network, a conspiracy that stretched across the very fabric of their investigation. Each name on the list wasn't just a witness or a suspect. It was a clue. It was a breadcrumb leading them closer to something that none of them were prepared for. Victor Haley's name was written with the kind of meticulous care that sent a chill through Harris's spine. His involvement wasn't something that had happened by accident. Haley had been a key player, someone who had orchestrated the entire operation from the shadows. And now, Harris realized, the case wasn't about bringing justice to the past. It was about stopping something much bigger than they had ever imagined. "We need to find him," Harris said, his voice cold, determined. "Now." The team moved swiftly, but with a newfound sense of urgency. The hours blurred together as they ran down leads, checked records, and dug into every corner of Haley's past. They found little at first. Haley had been careful to leave no trace. It was as though he had been watching them, preparing for this moment all along. But then came another break, one that sent a wave of cold realization through Harris's veins. Haley had been living under a different name. His real identity, carefully hidden for years, was finally revealed. Victor Haley had been using the alias Thomas Walker. A man named Thomas Walker had been registered in a small town not far from the Nevada-California border, living under a perfectly legitimate cover. Walker had been a pillar of the community. No one suspected a thing. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Thomas Walker and Victor Haley were one and the same. The quiet town of Fallon, Nevada, had been the perfect cover. No one ever questioned him. The perfect place for someone who had spent years running, hiding, building his empire in the shadows. But now, with Haley's name in their hands, everything changed. Harris felt the pressure mounting, the tension tightening like a vice. They weren't just dealing with an isolated group of criminals anymore. They were dealing with a man who had been pulling the strings, manipulating not just Carr, but an entire web of people who had all been waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, with Haley exposed, that moment was here. The next few days were a blur of surveillance, constant checking and waiting. Harris's team closed in on Haley's last known location. They surrounded the small house on the outskirts of Fallon, the only place Haley had truly called home in the years leading up to his disappearance. The sense of finality was inescapable. This wasn't just about making an arrest anymore. This was about ending something that had been festering for far too long. When they entered the house, they found it exactly as Haley had left it. Neat, almost sterile. The kind of house that didn't feel lived in. Every surface was dusted, every corner was tidy, but there was something wrong. The walls felt too bare. The house was empty in more ways than one. It wasn't until they reached the basement that Harris found what he had been dreading. There, hidden behind a false wall, was a room. A small, windowless room, untouched by time. Inside, a collection of photographs, dozens of them, arranged neatly on a table, each one showing a different victim. Lisa Daniels, Tara Moretti, a list of names that stretched far longer than Harris had ever imagined. But it was more than just photographs. Harris's hand trembled slightly as he flipped through the papers on the table. It was a journal, Haley's journal, and the words on the pages were chilling. They weren't just about the past, they were about the future. I've built something bigger than you could ever understand. The game doesn't stop with me. It's bigger now. It's bigger than Carr. It's bigger than all of them. The words were taunting, but they weren't just taunts. They were a map, a plan. Haley had been planning something much more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. Harris's mind raced. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just about solving a cold case. This was about stopping something far worse. Haley wasn't done. He had been operating in the shadows for years, and now, with Carr out of the picture, he was preparing to expand his operation. The network, the twisted group of individuals who had been hiding in the darkness, was still out there. They were still connected. Harris's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Haley had been the mastermind. He had orchestrated everything from the start. But he had never been caught because no one had ever looked deep enough. They had only been hunting the visible pieces, the killers who had done the work. But Haley had remained in the shadows, pulling the strings, watching from afar. As Harris stood there, the weight of the case pressing down on him, the urgency of the situation became impossible to ignore. The clock was ticking. Haley was still out there, and he wasn't done, not by a long shot. And as the truth unfolded before them, one thing was clear. They were no longer just trying to catch a killer. They were trying to stop an entire operation, an operation that spanned years and was bigger than anyone had ever realized. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The air felt colder as Harris stared at the journal in his hands, the words burning in his mind. The game doesn't stop with me. Haley's words echoed in his ears, cutting through the silence like a knife. Everything had led to this moment. The hunt for the killer, for the mastermind behind the horrors that had plagued Sparks, Nevada, for so many years. It had all come to a head. But now, with Haley's journal in hand, it became painfully clear. This wasn't just about one man, one twisted individual who had sought to satisfy his sadistic needs. Haley's words revealed a far more insidious truth. The network was larger than anyone had imagined, and it wasn't just about Carr or Caldwell. Haley had been the architect, and there were more pieces in play, pieces still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The journal was a blueprint, a roadmap that pointed to something even darker than Harris had feared. It wasn't just the past that Haley had documented, it was the future. His notes were filled with details of the operation that stretched far beyond Sparks, beyond Nevada. They were global. There were names, some familiar, some new, contacts in other states, people they hadn't even begun to look for, and worst of all, there were plans. Plans for more, plans for new victims. The realization hit Harris hard. Haley hadn't been operating alone for years. He had been grooming people, training them, using his twisted network of enablers to continue his work. And it wasn't over. Far from it. Haley's journal wasn't just a confession, it was a manifesto, a declaration that the work would continue even after his arrest, even after Carr's capture, because the game, as Haley had so smugly claimed, wasn't over, not yet. The warehouse basement, once eerily quiet, felt suffocating now. Harris's mind raced, pulling together the pieces of the puzzle. If Haley had been the mastermind, then who else had been involved? Who else had helped him build this twisted empire? The deeper he dug, the more dangerous the game became. Haley had made it clear that they weren't just dealing with a few isolated incidents. This was bigger than anyone had realized. There was no time to waste. Every second counted. Harris's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing. His heart skipped a beat as he answered, his voice steady but strained. "Harris," the voice on the other end said, grim and urgent. "We've got something. You need to come back to the station. It's big." Harris felt the blood drain from his face. The case had shifted again, and now they were closer to the heart of the operation than ever before. Something was happening, something that was about to turn everything on its head. He didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his coat and rushed out, the weight of everything bearing down on him with each step. Back at the station, the team was already gathered, and the tension in the room was palpable. The walls seemed to close in as Harris entered, the files and photographs laid out before him like a map to something dark, something hidden. "We found something," Detective Reynolds said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's a pattern. We've been looking at the wrong targets." Harris leaned over the table, his pulse quickening as he scanned the documents. What they had found was worse than he could have imagined. The operation that Haley had built, this network of predators, had been far more extensive than they'd thought. They had been looking at isolated victims, individual cases that had appeared random at the time, but now they could see the pattern. Haley had been operating within a network of high-powered individuals, people who had connections across multiple industries, law enforcement, politics, business, the rich and powerful, the untouchable. And among them were names Harris recognized, people he thought he could trust, people who had been pulling the strings, enabling Haley's network to thrive, to operate without fear of detection. These weren't just ordinary criminals. They were powerful, influential, and they had been working with Haley for years, using his operation to cover their own tracks, to hide their own dark desires. "There's more," Reynolds said, pointing to a new set of files. "These are active. They're still out there. We've identified key members who are still involved. Haley's arrest was just the first domino to fall, but the real players haven't been caught yet." The weight of her words settled over Harris like a blanket of dread. He thought they were close to the end, that catching Carr, catching Haley would bring closure. But it wasn't closure. It was a new beginning, one that would force them to face an even darker truth. "We need to take them down," Harris said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Now." The hours that followed were a blur. Harris and his team moved quickly, gathering intel, tracking down the names they had uncovered in Haley's journal. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how deep the corruption ran. It was everywhere. There was no safe place, no one who could be trusted. The network had its fingers in every part of society. But they were close, so close, they could feel it. As the final arrests were made, as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Even as the investigation moved forward, he knew the game Haley had been playing would continue. There would be others hidden in the shadows, watching. But now, with the network exposed, they had one chance to destroy it once and for all. But no matter how many arrests were made, no matter how many names were brought to justice, the community of Sparks, Nevada would never be the same. The darkness that had hovered over them for so long had been lifted, but it left scars, deep scars that would take years, maybe decades, to heal. Harris stood at the window, watching the sun set over the town, the weight of the case pressing down on him like a heavy fog. The truth had been revealed, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. The past was gone, but the future was uncertain. One thing was clear. The darkness might have been driven out of the light, but it would always be waiting, just beyond the edge of the shadows. The arrest of the final conspirators was the moment Harris had been working toward for years. And yet, as the last of the corrupt officials were led away in handcuffs, there was no sense of relief. No euphoria, no victory. It was as if the town of Sparks had been holding its breath for so long that it had forgotten how to exhale. The truth had been laid bare. The dark web of manipulation, murder, and deception, crafted over decades, had finally been shattered. But the remnants of it lingered. They always do. The faces of the victims, the images of lives lost in the shadows, couldn't simply be erased. They would never be forgotten. And neither would the price they'd all paid for this revelation. The final night of the operation, when all the key players had been arrested, was meant to bring closure. Harris had hoped for a quiet end to the case, some sense of finality that would allow him to move on, to look ahead. But as he sat alone in his office, the files scattered across his desk, the phone silent in front of him, he realized the one thing he hadn't accounted for, the emotional toll. The case had taken everything from him. It had stretched him to his limits, and it had exposed him in ways he hadn't prepared for. There had been moments, quiet moments, when he stood over the photos of the victims or listened to the tearful accounts of family members, when he had wondered if justice was even possible. The faces of the dead haunted him. The words of the families, the anger in their voices, echoed through the walls of his mind. Yes, the case was solved. But what had it cost? What had they lost in the process? It wasn't just the lives of the victims, it was the sense of safety that had been stolen, piece by piece, from every corner of the community. The trust they had placed in their neighbors, their leaders, their own government, it had been shattered. Harris had been forced to look into the heart of something far darker than he could have ever imagined, and while the arrests were an undeniable victory, the scars ran deep. The investigation had exposed a sickness in their midst, an infection that had taken root so long ago it had become a part of the town itself. No one was untouched by it. Every person in Sparks had unknowingly shared space with a murderer, a monster who could hide in plain sight for years, feeding off their trust and ignorance. The town had been a perfect breeding ground for someone like Haley. It had been too small, too quiet, too trusting, and the people, unknowingly, had been complicit in letting it happen. As Harris walked out of his office and into the chilly Nevada night, the weight of the case pressed on him like an anchor. He had come to terms with the fact that they had won, if victory could be measured in such a way. They had brought justice to those who had suffered, caught those who had caused so much pain. But the reality of it, of what it had cost, of what it had exposed, was hard to accept. The truth, when it finally came, had been a bitter pill to swallow. It was one thing to bring down a killer. It was another to realize just how far the corruption went. And yet, even in the silence of the night, Harris knew he couldn't stop. The investigation had ended, but the impact of it would last forever. As the light from the street lamps flickered across the pavement, he glanced back at the police station. He didn't know what the future held. The case had been solved. But the war against the darkness, that was something that never truly ended. And as long as people like Haley existed, people who lived to prey on the vulnerable, there would always be more work to do. Sparks had been torn apart, but now it had the chance to rebuild. The ghosts of the past would always linger, but the future was theirs to shape. And Harris, he wasn't ready to give up just yet. The sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the town. For the first time in years, there was a sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. Harris took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and stepped forward into the light. The game might never truly end, but for now at least, there was peace. Morning comes thin and pale over Sparks, and the rooftops still look like they're holding their breath. The banners are down, the press van's gone, the courthouse echo quiet. They say the case is over. They say the nightmare ended with the cuffs and the mugshots, and the boxes of evidence moved from the basement to the vault. They say a lot of things. Harris hears them and nods and signs what needs signing, but the sound that stays with him is softer. Paper sliding under a door, cardboard rubbing cardboard. The whisper of a lid lifting in the dark. The sound that started everything, a storage box breathing after 20 years of dust. He keeps the journal prints close. He keeps the wall clean. No more threads, no more pins. Just a single photograph centered at eye level. Lisa Daniels in the shade of a gas station awning, the day before she vanished. Sun in her hair, a cola in her hand, a shadow on the asphalt that looks like a question mark fallen on its side. Every morning he stands in front of it. Every morning he says nothing. The department has its new rhythm. Debriefs, commendations, quiet warnings to watch your back. Some names on leave, some names move to other towns. Sparks pretends to be ordinary again, like the street sweepers can erase a decade of missing posters with 3 passes and a shrug. The diner opens early and the waitress says coffee before he asks. The local paper runs a column called Aftermath where people write about sleeping again. The letters are neat, the grammar is fine, the fear leaks through the punctuation. 2 months out, the first anonymous envelope arrives. No return address. A Nevada postmark that could be from anywhere on the highway. Inside, 1 photo, 1 headline, 1 sentence cut from a magazine and glued to an index card. The photo is of a storage unit hallway, bare bulbs, concrete floor. The headline is old, cold case task force launched. The sentence is worse. You found 1 box. How many did you miss? Harris reads it 3 times, then puts it in an evidence sleeve, then puts the sleeve in a drawer he locks with his thumb and a lie. He tells himself it's a hoax. He tells himself people do this after big cases. He tells himself the job is to filter noise from signal. The words stick like grit under contact lenses. Missed. How many? You. He asks Reynolds to pull the city's list of delinquent storage rentals. She doesn't roll her eyes. She's learned the same rule he has. Call it paranoia until it pays off, then call it instinct. The list comes back fat. People forget to pay. People disappear. People leave their lives in units to grow stale and strange. They circle 3 addresses where the names nudge memory. One used to belong to a mechanic who vanished the year Lisa did. One was rented by a shell company Caldwell touched with a cashier's check in 2008. One sits behind a pawn shop with a cracked neon open sign that is never turned off. They go in quiet, warrants clean, cameras on. The first unit holds lawn chairs and a rusted treadmill and the smell of warm plastic. The second holds Christmas wreaths, a stack of VHS tapes, dented toy trains, and a box of carefully folded newspapers from 1991 to 2006. The third is the one that takes something out of Harris he doesn't get back. A room within a room, a plywood cube inside corrugated steel. Not a murder booth, not a ritual chamber. That would be easier. This one is office bright. A folding table, a fan that doesn't oscillate. 6 banker's boxes with black grease pencil notes on the lids, numbers, cities, initials. The handwriting doesn't match Carr or Caldwell. The handwriting is tight, controlled, like it wants to be a typeface when it grows up. They open the first box and find exactly what the anonymous card promised. Another curation. Not trophies, not souvenirs, reports, photocopies, utility records, DMV prints, the kind of paper that sweats bureaucracy. The sheet on top is stamped archive copy in red. It's their own case file from 2005, the version that should have lived in a locked municipal cabinet. It has traveled, it has been touched. Someone has annotated margins in pencil with arrows and little exclamation marks that do not get excited. They sit there like judgment. Harris recognizes one note. A tiny X beside the photo of the van. See line 3, a line that no one saw in 05, a line that broke everything open now. Who found that line? Who trained his eyes toward it? Who placed that dusty box so it could be found just so, just then, just right for the camera? He feels the idea come in like cold water over the spine. The archivist. Not a name, not yet. A function, a presence that prefers paper to people. Someone who curates terrible things and arranges them for maximum impact. Someone who makes sure truth appears on a schedule. He hates the idea because it explains too much. Reynolds flips through the second box. Phone trees, bank wires, a spreadsheet printed like it came from a machine that sighs when it prints. There are tabs. The tabs say Tempe, Ukiah, Puerto Penasco, Eureka. The line items are not crimes. They are context. Rent paid, lights left on, gasoline bought late. Missing person flyers weighed against county budgets. A pattern emerges as thin as fishing line and twice as strong. The archivist isn't killing. The archivist is lighting the stage and nudging the actors into their marks. They pull prints and get nothing. They pull dust and get everything. A thin layer that says this room is visited, not lived in. The instruments are here, not the hands. Harris reaches for the third lid and finds a Polaroid taped to the underside. A handheld shot of an evidence shelf in their own station. Date stamped 4 months before the dusty box appeared. There's a post-it curled at the edge of the photo with a scrawl in that same tight hand. You keep what matters where anyone can touch it. The fan hums. Harris feels his chest tighten the way it does when elevators stop between floors. Not panic, recognition. The room is a mirror. They bag it, they seal it, they take the boxes and lock them unceremoniously inside another box, this time a chain of custody locker that forgives no one. Word does not leak because word is a gas and you can smell it when it does. This stays sealed for a week. 2. Then the second envelope arrives. Same postmark, same weight, different message. A clipping. Cold case solved after 20 years. A sentence. Headlines make maps. Maps lead crowds. Crowds break doors. A photo. Harris's team outside the first storage unit. Their faces hard. Their posture a sermon about certainty. On the back, 3 words in pencil. Stop performing investigations. He sleeps less, he eats whatever is closest. He replays every press conference and counts how many times he said transparency. He counts how many times he said we. He wonders if the archivist collects pronouns like feathers. He wonders if this is punishment for saying the right things too neatly. He hates himself for thinking theatrically about a man who harvests the dead for paperwork. Then a call at 2:17 a.m., a voice he knows but can't place because it is being careful. A whisper-bound baritone that belongs to one of the families maybe, or a reporter who learned the shape of guilt. The voice says there's a lock cut off Unit B13 behind the old feed mill. Says someone wheeled a cart in. Says someone wheeled nothing out. Says he should come alone and bring no one because the show stops when there are lights. The click is polite. The dial tone is old-fashioned, like the line wanted to be dramatic. He goes. Of course he goes. He tells himself he's retrieving evidence, not chasing a phantom into a trap. He tells himself Reynolds will kill him if she finds out, which is another reason to make sure she never does. The feed mill looms the way dead industry does, mournful, skeletal, surprised to still be standing. B13 gapes without a lock. The corrugation is cool under his palm. The unit smells like cardboard and dryer lint. Nothing moves. He is about to retreat when a box scrapes somewhere behind the cheap metal wall, that telltale drag of weight on concrete. He draws, angles his shoulder, speaks like a cop on television and a man in danger. "Police, show me your hands." The scrape stops. A small square slides into view along the floor, pushed from the other side of a partition, a cube of thick paper. He crouches and sees it's a cassette tape in a cardboard slip, not a thumb drive, not a phone. A tape like 1994, written on the spine in the same disciplined pencil, "Do not dig." He digs anyway. He finds the seam. He pries. He opens a panel to a crawl space the size of a bathtub. It is empty except for a tape recorder with dead batteries and a single sheet of paper curled at the edges. On it, a typewritten paragraph that reads like a manifesto trimmed by a librarian. "Cold cases are not puzzles to solve. They are weather systems to survive. You made this one into a parade. Your parade woke sleepers. Sleepers buy locks. Locks hide rot. Rot grows in secret. Do you want justice or do you want applause? Choose." He reads it twice and feels the kind of anger that burns clean, the kind that doesn't spill into shouting. He wants to throw the recorder through the wall. He wants to throw the wall into the river. He wants to go back in time and shut the station doors and tell the cameras to wait outside while they listen to the dust. Back in the car, he stares at the tape and thinks about machines, where to find one, who still has one. He thinks about the way evidence ages, not like wine and not like milk, but like a story retold badly until someone brings the original script. He drives to the station and does the thing he swore he wouldn't. He wakes the lab tech he trusts most and says, "I need an antique." 30 minutes later, they are watching a spooled ribbon spin under a hooded light like a magician's trick done slow. The tape's hiss is a wind across a field. Then a voice. The voice is neither Carr nor Caldwell. The voice does not belong to Haley. The voice is precise the way the handwriting was precise. The archivist speaks like a professor who learned to whisper. "You looked in Elko and found performance notes," the voice says. "Good. You should know what you are inside of. You solved a murder and started a fashion. You taught the cameras how to say cold case with a tremor. You gave grief a hashtag. Now you will receive boxes. You will open some. You will leave some sealed. This is your discipline test." Harris closes his eyes. He hears the fan from the plywood room. He hears the neat hum of systems built by people who like labels more than light. The voice continues. "Open the wrong box and you wake something I can't put back to sleep. Leave the right box sealed and you save someone you will never meet. You wanted a map. This is a compass. North is humility. South is spectacle. East is speed. West is patience. Do not pretend you don't know which way you've been walking." The tape clicks. A second track begins. It is 7 seconds of hallway. Boots on cement, a lid sliding, a muffled laugh that might be the recorder inside a cardboard mouth. Then silence again, this time shaped like an invitation. They sit there at the lab bench, 2 people under fluorescent light with a voice in a plastic shell telling them their moral geometry. Reynolds would call it theater. Harris would have called it taunting 3 months ago. Tonight he calls it accurate and hates himself for doing so. He drives home as the sky goes gray. He parks and doesn't go inside. He watches the front of his house like it belongs to someone else. A shape on the porch, a box, of course a box, lighter than fear, heavier than hope. He picks it up and sees the familiar tape seam, the black grease pencil, the neat capital letters. Lisa Daniels, return. His throat tightens. His hands decide to open it even while his mind begs them not to. Inside, Lisa's missing person flyer, the original, the tape from the family camcorder of her 24th birthday that the Daniels thought they lost in the move. The straw from the cola in the gas station photo sealed and labeled and untouched by lab hands. An index card last with a single line, "You're not the only one who wants the past to stay honest." He stands with the box and the card and the sun climbing up the facade, and he understands the new case will not be about a killer you can cuff. It will be about a curator who believes in the violence of revelation, someone who thinks truth needs choreography, who thinks headlines are scalpels and evidence is a stage prop until it is placed at the right angle in the right light at the right time to wake the sleeping town. Someone who needed Harris to be loud so the message would carry. He brings the box inside and locks the door and pulls the blinds and calls Reynolds and says 3 words he hasn't said since the night the file came alive. We start over. He can hear her posture straighten through the line. He can hear her nod. He tells her to say nothing to anyone, to move like fog, to cut every list into pieces and shuffle the pieces, until even the archivist can't predict the rhythm. He says they will open some boxes and leave others closed, not because a voice told them to, but because the right kind of silence protects the living. On the table, Lisa looks out from the flyer with that same tilt of smile. On the tape machine, the ribbon is done and the reels rest, like eyes that just learned something they wish they didn't. Outside, Sparks exhales and doesn't know it. Inside, Harris writes 4 words at the top of a legal pad in the smallest, plainest hand he can manage because he wants them to look like instructions, not a headline. Find the archivist quietly. He underlines quietly twice. Then he starts listing boxes. The days following the discovery of the box and the chilling words from the voice on the tape felt like they were suspended in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Time in Sparks, Nevada, had slowed to an unbearable crawl, the city caught between what had been exposed and what was still lurking beneath the surface. Harris, once resolute and focused on bringing justice to the victims, now felt as though he was caught in a maze of shifting walls. He had hoped that the resolution of the cold case would bring closure, that the arrest of Derek Carr and the dismantling of the immediate network would be the end. But what he had uncovered in the abandoned warehouse, what had emerged from Haley's journal and the unsettling voicemail had made it clear the shadows were deeper than they had ever suspected. The box he had found at his doorstep, the original missing person flyer, the straw from the gas station photo, Lisa Daniels' 24th birthday tape, was not just a message. It was a reminder that the truth was a fragile thing, and some stories were meant to be buried, left forgotten in the corners of history. But someone with access to all the records was intent on dragging those forgotten pieces back into the light. Harris couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the eerie certainty that he was not just dealing with a case but with an entity, a force that had been operating in the shadows of Nevada for years, carefully manipulating the course of events, erasing things only to bring them back at will. There was an unsettling calm that had descended over him. The tape, the anonymous letters, the boxes, all these clues seemed to suggest that the archivist was no ordinary criminal. He wasn't after power or money, at least not in the way most criminals were. The archivist's purpose was something much darker, much more cerebral. He wasn't creating chaos for chaos's sake. He was engineering a kind of ordered madness, a carefully orchestrated manipulation of truth and memory. Sitting at his desk late into the night, Harris stared at the box containing the flyer. Lisa's smile, frozen forever on the paper, seemed to stare back at him accusingly. He couldn't shake the thought that her case had never been the focal point of the investigation. It was just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The missing persons cases, the unexplained disappearances, the strange connections between Carr, Caldwell, and Haley. Everything had been connected all along. It had all been part of a greater scheme, a game designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who had been watching, guiding the investigation from the shadows. He thought back to the words Haley had spoken, the taunting smile on the man's face as he had made it clear that the game wasn't over, that they had only just begun to scratch the surface. The feeling of being watched, of being led down a path, had never quite left him. Harris had always believed that the truth would set things right, but now he wasn't so sure. He had seen too much, too many twists, too many unexpected turns. The voice on the tape had warned him, "You've opened the wrong box and you wake something I can't put back to sleep." The warning echoed in his mind, as much a threat as a riddle. Was it too late to stop? Could he even stop? Reynolds had been quiet since the discovery, though Harris could sense her unease. She had always been the practical one, the one who kept a level head even in the darkest of times. But now, when he looked at her, he saw the same doubt in her eyes. The archivist was a shadow, elusive and maddening, and the more they dug, the more they realized the hole they were digging wasn't just deep, it was infinite. "Reynolds," Harris finally said one evening, his voice rough with exhaustion, "we can't let this go. The archivist isn't just playing with us, he's playing with everything we believe in. Everything we've been taught about justice, about what it means to bring the truth to light, it's all part of the game to him." She nodded, her lips tight with resolve. "I know, but Harris, there's something else we need to consider. The deeper we go into this, the more we risk becoming part of his story. We have to be careful. We don't know who's watching us. We don't know if the people we're trusting are still trustworthy." The words hit harder than he expected. The truth was, he hadn't considered the risk, not fully, not until now. Every step they had taken had only led them further into the maze. The archivist had been watching, yes, but so had the people who had been working with him, who had been pulling the strings in ways Harris hadn't fully understood. They couldn't afford to keep playing by the same rules. They needed to think differently. They needed to outsmart the very people who had engineered this web of deceit. For the next several days, Harris and Reynolds worked in the shadows. They cut off their communication lines, went underground, following leads with extreme caution. No one could be trusted, not even their closest allies. The walls of the investigation had closed in tighter, and now, more than ever, they needed to be meticulous. They needed to work with precision. Every new piece of evidence felt like a trap set just for them. Every name they uncovered led them to more questions. Who else was involved in the archivist's game? Who was still out there hiding behind their carefully crafted facades? And then came the message, another anonymous letter. This one wasn't delivered in person, but slipped under the door of the police station, timed to perfection. The message was short, scrawled in ink that looked fresh, deliberately so. You want the truth? Then you'll have to find it. The archivist is only one story. I'm the one who holds the next chapter. A new player, another hidden figure in the labyrinth. This was no longer just about solving a case. It was about uncovering a truth so twisted, so deep, that it threatened everything they believed about justice. Harris felt the tension in his chest tighten. The game was still going. The archivist had set the rules, but now someone else had stepped in, and they were rewriting the narrative. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Harris felt a cold sense of inevitability creep over him. The road ahead was uncharted, but one thing was clear. The end was still a long way off. And the real game? It had only just begun.